My name is Nora Callahan. I'm 32 years old, and 3 days after I buried my husband, his mother told me to my face that the bakery we built together was never really mine. She said it the way you tell someone the weather. Calm, certain, like it was simply a fact of the world, like gravity or the price of milk. I was standing in the parking lot of St. Michael's Cathedral in Ottawa, still holding a single white rose from the casket arrangement, and she walked right up to me in her black wool coat and pearls and said, "The business was registered under Liam's name. You know that. The family will be taking over operations starting Monday." Then she patted my hand. Patted it like she was consoling me about something minor, a cancelled dinner reservation, a parking ticket, not the complete dismantling of the life her son and I had spent 7 years building together. She turned and walked back to her other son before I could find words. I stood there in the February cold with wet snow falling on my shoulders, and I thought, they think I'm alone. They think I have no one and nothing. They have no idea what Liam left behind for me. Let me tell you something about Liam Delaney. He was the kind of man who noticed everything. He noticed when you hadn't eaten lunch. He noticed when the neighbour's dog was limping. He noticed, long before I did, exactly what his family was capable of. I met him at a food market on Elgin Street in the summer of 2016. He was arguing cheerfully with a cheese vendor about the difference between Quebec Brie and French Brie, and he was completely wrong, and he knew it, and he didn't care. I told him he was wrong. He turned around, grinned, and said, "I know, but she makes better cheese, so I'm letting her win." We got coffee, then dinner, then 7 years passed. His family never liked me. I want to be clear about that from the start, because it wasn't a slow thing, it was immediate. His mother, Eleanor, had a particular smile she used when she disapproved of something but wanted to maintain appearances. It was thin and bright, like winter sunlight on ice, and she aimed it at me the very first time Liam brought me to the house in Rockcliffe Park. His father, Gordon, was quieter about it. He just didn't speak to me unless forced. I wasn't from Rockcliffe Park. I was from Vanier, on the east side, daughter of a retired bus driver and a woman who cleaned offices downtown for 30 years. I had a community college diploma, a student loan I'd been chipping away at for years, and calluses on my hands from working in a commercial kitchen since I was 19. I was loud when I laughed. I used the wrong fork at their dinner table the first time, and I didn't even notice until I saw Eleanor's expression. I told stories with my hands. I was everything they considered coarse. Liam didn't care. He thought all of it was wonderful. His brother Owen was worse than their parents in some ways because he was my age and had no excuse. He was slick in the way of people who've never had to apologize for anything. He called me the girlfriend, well into our engagement, always with a small pause before the word, like he was being generous by even using it. His wife, Renata, followed his lead in everything, which I found more sad than anything else. The bakery started as a fantasy we talked about on a Saturday morning in our apartment on Bank Street. I had my hands in bread dough, and Liam was drinking coffee at the kitchen island, and he said, "What if this was the job?" I laughed. He didn't. 6 months later, we had a business plan. 18 months after that, we signed a lease on a space in Westboro. Liam handled the finances. I handled everything that happened inside those four walls. The recipes, the staff, the suppliers, the daily grind of making a small business work. We registered it under Liam's name for reasons that seemed practical at the time. He had the cleaner credit history, the existing relationship with the bank. It was a Tuesday afternoon decision made with no ceremony, no particular weight. We were partners in every sense. The paperwork felt like a formality. I understand now that his family was watching all of it, taking notes. The first Christmas after we opened, Eleanor hosted. I bought a cardamom and apple cake I'd spent 2 days perfecting, something I was genuinely proud of, something I thought might finally make a dent. Eleanor accepted it at the door, looked it over with that smile, and said, "How lovely. I'll put it in the kitchen." It appeared later, unsliced, on a side table, while her store-bought Yule log was given the place of honor on the dining table. When people asked about the cake, she said, "Oh, Nora brought something." The way she said something told everyone everything they needed to know about what she thought of it. Liam found me in the kitchen later, pretending to get more wine, and he put his forehead against mine and didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said, "I see it, Nor. I see all of it." He always did. I kept trying. I brought gifts. I remembered birthdays. I asked Gordon about his interests, even though he answered in monosyllables. I went to every family event, every Sunday dinner, every Easter gathering at that house in Rockcliffe, and I smiled and I was pleasant, and I absorbed every small dismissal, and I told myself it would get better. It didn't get better. It got worse the year the bakery started doing well, really well. We'd been written up in the Ottawa Citizen, we had a waiting list for custom wedding cakes. The financials had finally tipped from survival to genuine profit, and suddenly Gordon was interested in the business in a way he'd never been interested in anything I was connected to. He started asking Liam questions at dinners. Technical questions, operational questions. He'd look at me while asking them as if I might not be there. Owen started mentioning that he had a friend in commercial real estate, another friend who'd done work in the food and beverage sector. Renata started asking about wholesale opportunities. I told Liam it felt like reconnaissance. He went quiet in a way I hadn't seen before, then said, "I know. I've been thinking about something. Can we talk tonight?" We sat at our kitchen table that night with cups of tea going cold between us, and he told me about a conversation he'd had with a lawyer. Not a family lawyer. A woman named Audrey Shim, who worked out of a small firm in the Glebe Bay and who had a particular specialty in small business ownership, asset protection, and family conflict. He'd found her, he said, about 8 months earlier. He'd been meeting with her every few weeks. He'd been, quietly and carefully, building a wall around everything we had. I stared at him. 8 months? He nodded. I grew up with them, Nor. I know exactly what they're capable of when money is involved. He walked me through it. He'd had the bakery restructured, not dramatically, not in a way that raised flags, but methodically. Audrey had set up a proper partnership agreement, retroactively formalized, that documented my contributions to the business in exhaustive detail. Sweat equity, intellectual property, the recipes I developed, the client relationships I built. The business now had a shareholder structure that reflected reality. We each owned 50%, equally, with right of first refusal if either of us ever wanted to sell. He'd also had our personal assets reorganized as joint property with right of survivorship under Ontario law, which meant that if anything happened to him, everything transferred to me automatically, outside of probate. He pulled out a binder. He'd been documenting everything. Not our finances, that was in separate folders, but them, every comment he'd witnessed. The cake at Christmas, the time Gordon referred to the bakery as Liam's project in front of a whole table of relatives while I sat right there. The time Owen suggested at a barbecue that maybe I should consider stepping back from operations once we had kids, as though my entire contribution to the business was contingent on domestic circumstances. Every time Eleanor had dismissed me in public, Liam had written it down. Dates, exact words. His handwriting was small and steady and meticulous. Why? I asked, though I already felt the answers settling in my chest. Because I want there to be a record, he said, of what they did, of who you are, in case there's ever a moment where they try to rewrite it. He reached across the table and took my hand. I need you to memorize one phone number. Audrey Shim, if anything ever happens to me and they come for any of it, you call her first, before you answer a single question, before you sign a single piece of paper, before you let anyone into that building. I told him he was being dramatic. I kissed him. We went to bed. 14 months later, he was diagnosed with an aggressive brain tumor, glioblastoma, the kind that doesn't negotiate. The year that followed was the worst and the most precious of my life. We kept the bakery open. I needed the routine, and so did he in the early months before it became too difficult. He'd come in on weekend mornings and sit at the table by the window with coffee and the newspaper, and the staff treated him like he'd always been there, because he had been. He loved watching the Saturday rush. He said it was the most honest picture of the world he knew. People buying bread and birthday cakes and things that were purely about joy. His family came around during this period. Casseroles, cards. His mother sitting at his bedside in our living room with the carefully composed face of a grieving parent, though whenever her eyes moved around the room, I could see what she was actually doing. She was assessing the furniture, the built-in shelves Liam had refinished, the art on the walls. Owen started mentioning the bakery in present tense in ways that unsettled me. When things settle down, we should talk about the business. Gordon brought up tax implications of inheritance one evening at dinner, while Liam was resting in the next room, and I remember staring at my plate and not trusting myself to speak. The night Liam gave me the sealed envelope, I wasn't expecting it. It was a Thursday in November, about 6 weeks before he died, and he was having a better day. He'd been up and dressed, and we'd had lunch at the kitchen table together, something that had become rare. After we ate, he went to the bedroom and came back with a white envelope with my name on it, written in his steady handwriting. "Don't open this now," he said. "This is for after. Give it to Audrey. Tell her you have it. She'll know when it's time." I put it in the fireproof box in the back of our closet, between our passports and the bakery lease, and I didn't open it. He died on a Tuesday morning in January. The hospice nurse had stayed overnight. I was holding his hand. The snow outside was falling the way it does in Ottawa in January, quietly and without drama, and the room was warm, and it was peaceful in the way that peaceful things can also be completely unbearable. 2 days after the funeral, Eleanor found me in the parking lot of St. A.T. Michael's and told me the bakery would be returning to family management. That night, I drove to our kitchen, sat at the table where we'd made our battle plan, and I called Audrey Shim. She answered on the second ring, even though it was almost 9 in the evening. "I've been expecting your call," she said. "How are you holding up?" Then, before I could answer, "I know that's a useless question. Let me ask a better one. Have they made any direct moves yet, or just declarations?" I told her about the parking lot. She said, "Good. That's exactly what we needed them to do. Don't respond to anything. Don't sign anything. Don't let anyone into the building without my explicit instruction. I'll be in touch tomorrow." What followed was the most specific, deliberate week of my life. I learned things I hadn't known. Audrey had been thorough in ways I hadn't fully understood when Liam first walked me through the basics. The partnership agreement she'd drawn up was ironclad. My 50% ownership was not in dispute. But there were complications. Liam's 50% was now part of his estate, and under Ontario's Succession Law Reform Act, as his spouse I was first in line. His will, which Audrey had helped him draft, was explicit. His share of the bakery was to be transferred to me. There was a clear no-challenge clause. If any family member attempted to contest the will, they would forfeit the small personal bequests he'd left them: his grandmother's watch to Owen, a set of first-edition books to Gordon, things that had sentimental value. Tripwires, Audrey called them. "They can try," she said, sitting across from me in her office on Bank Street on a Thursday morning, both of us with coffee from the place downstairs. "But the documentation is so complete, and your claims so clear, that it would cost them significantly in legal fees and damage their credibility publicly before they got anywhere, and your husband anticipated they might try anyway." She reached across her desk and handed me a document. "He left instructions about the envelope." I told her I had it at home. She said to bring it in. The following Monday, Eleanor and Gordon arrived at the bakery at 9 in the morning, which was not yet open to the public. Owen was with them. They brought a man I didn't recognize, someone in a suit who turned out to be a lawyer they'd retained. He was very young. He seemed uncomfortable. I was already there. So was Audrey. Audrey was 53, Short, with reading glasses, she wore a beaded chain in a manner that was almost professorial, careful and methodical and completely without aggression, which made her somehow more frightening than anyone visibly angry. She was sitting at one of the cafe tables with a cup of tea and a very thick folder, and she nodded at them when they came in as though they were students, arriving a little late to a seminar. Eleanor stopped short when she saw her. Gordon frowned. Owen's jaw went slightly tight. Their lawyer introduced himself. Audrey shook his hand pleasantly and introduced herself and then said, "Shall we sit down? I have a fair amount to go over and I'd like to be thorough." They sat. The young lawyer already looked like he wanted to be somewhere else. Audrey opened her folder and began to explain. She explained the partnership agreement. She explained the shareholder structure. She explained the right of survivorship on all joint personal assets. She explained Liam's will with the clarity of someone describing directions to a grocery store. She laid every document on the table as she went, organized with numbered tabs, and she slid a copy across to the young lawyer, who began reading with increasing discomfort. "There is nothing ambiguous here," she said when she finished. "Nora owns the business. The assets transfer is not an event that needs to occur. It has already occurred, automatically, by operation of law and by the terms of documents executed years ago. Your client's presence here today does not change that." Eleanor hadn't moved. Her face was very controlled, which told me how rattled she was. She said, "This can't be right. Liam would have said something." Audrey looked at her with something that wasn't quite sympathy and wasn't quite opposite. "Mrs. Delaney, your son knew his family very well. He prepared for this conversation years before it became necessary. I think he hoped it wouldn't come to this. But he made sure that if it did, there would be nothing to argue about." Owen leaned forward. His voice was controlled but tight. "She came into this family with nothing. The money to start the business came from my parents." It wasn't true. There had been a loan from Gordon in the early days. Yes, a loan, not a gift, documented as such, fully repaid with interest in 2021. Audrey had the repayment records. She slid them across the table without saying anything, which was more effective than any response. The young lawyer put his hand on Owen's arm. A small gesture. "Stop talking." Eleanor made one more attempt. She looked at me, actually looked at me, perhaps for the first time in 7 years, and said, "Liam loved this family. He wouldn't have done this." I let her finish. Then I said, quietly, "He did this because he loved me, and because he knew you." Audrey then opened a second folder. "There's one more matter," she said. "Liam left a written statement for this occasion. He instructed me to read it, in the event that his family contested any part of his wishes." She looked around the table. "By coming here today with legal counsel and the stated intention of disputing the ownership structure, you've met that condition." She glanced at me. I nodded. She took out a single handwritten page and put her glasses on. She read. He'd written it in his careful small handwriting, and he'd addressed each of them by name. He told his mother that he had watched her make me feel small at every gathering for 7 years, and that he had smiled and said nothing and was ashamed of that now. He told her that the cardamom cake I'd brought that first Christmas had been the best thing on that table by a considerable margin, and he knew she knew it too. He told his father that dismissing me had meant dismissing the best decision he'd ever made. He told Owen that the word nothing was interesting, coming from someone who had never built anything on his own. And then he wrote something that I hadn't known was in the letter, hadn't known at all, and when Audrey read it, I had to press my knuckles against my mouth. He'd written, "Nora walked into my life and showed me what it looks like when a person makes things from scratch, not from inheritance, not from a name, from flour and time and stubbornness and love." If you had ever paid attention, you would have seen that she was the most impressive person in any room you shared with her. I saw it the first day. I'll spend whatever time I have left being grateful that she let me stand next to her. Eleanor made a sound I hadn't heard from her before. Not composed, not controlled, something that broke through the performance. Audrey folded the letter, placed it carefully back in the folder, and removed her glasses. I believe that concludes what we needed to discuss today, she said. The building closes to visitors in 5 minutes. I trust you can see yourselves out. The young lawyer stood first. He said something brief to Audrey in a low voice. She replied in the same register. He gathered his things and left without looking at Owen or Gordon or Eleanor. He'd seen enough. Owen left next, without speaking. Gordon followed. At the door, he stopped and turned back toward me. I thought for a moment he might say something. He didn't. He just looked at me for a few seconds and then walked out. Eleanor was last. She stood slowly, like someone recalibrating. At the door, she paused, the same as Gordon, and this time she did speak. He was happy, she said. It came out like a question more than a statement, like she'd only just understood something. Yes, I said, he really was. She left. Audrey and I sat in the quiet for a moment. The January light was coming through the front windows, pale and thin. I could hear the kitchen staff arriving through the back, the familiar sounds of the morning starting, metal trays, the industrial mixer. What happens now? I asked. Now you run your bakery, she said. I did. I won't pretend the months after were easy. Grief doesn't care about legal victories. There were mornings I drove to the bakery on autopilot and sat in the parking lot for 10 minutes before I could walk through the door, because inside it smelled like him, flour and coffee and whatever seasonal thing we had in the proofing oven. There were nights I ate cereal for dinner and watched television without knowing what I was watching. There were days when the bakery felt like the only real thing, but the bakery was real. That part was true. In the spring, I changed the signage. It had said Delaney's Westboro Bakery, which had always struck me as slightly formal for what we actually were. I renamed it. I spent a long time on this decision. I wanted something that was his, but also mine, something that said something true. I named it Breadwinner. Liam would have found that funny. That's how I knew it was right. I hired a full-time manager for the morning shift, which gave me room to start something I'd been thinking about for a while. Ottawa has a lot of culinary programs at the college level and a lot of young people coming out of them who can't afford the equipment to start their own things. I started an apprenticeship program, paid. One apprentice at a time, given access to the kitchen on 2 evenings a week to develop their own products. 6 months, then they move on and someone new comes in. The first apprentice developed a line of bannock-based pastries that we started selling on weekends. They sold out every Saturday for 3 months running. I got a letter from Gordon in August. Not Eleanor, Gordon specifically, which surprised me. It was short. It said he'd heard the bakery was doing well. It said he'd seen the write-up in the magazine. It said, and this part I've read several times, Liam chose well. I should have said that sooner. I put the letter in the fireproof box, not to use against them, not for anything, just because it was honest, and honest things are worth keeping. Some weeks I still reach for my phone to call him. I still do the thing where I think of something I need to tell him, and then I remember, and the remembering is its own small loss every time. I've learned to sit with that. You don't stop carrying the weight, you just get stronger. I found a note in his handwriting last fall, tucked inside one of the baking books on the shelf in the bakery kitchen. I think he put it there to be found eventually, the way you hide a little gift for someone to discover when they're not expecting it. It was just 3 lines. The bread always rises. Keep your hands warm. I love you, Nor. I taped it to the wall by the proofing station. It's still there. Some mornings when the first loaves are in and the kitchen is warm and the city is just waking up outside the windows, I stand in that room and I think about what he said at the very beginning, that Saturday morning when I had my hands in dough and he looked at me and said, "What if this was the job?" It's the job. It's also something more than that now. It's the thing I built, the thing we built, the thing I held on to when they tried to take it, and the thing I'm still building every day he isn't here to see it. That's what you do when someone loves you well enough to leave you a fortress. You don't just live inside it. You make it worth defending. I think about the cardamom cake a lot still. Not with bitterness, that part took a while, but with a kind of clarity I didn't have when I was standing in that kitchen baking it. I was so sure that if I just tried hard enough, gave enough, showed up enough, they'd eventually see me. What I didn't understand then is that people who have decided not to see you will not be convinced by effort. They'll just take the effort and use it as evidence that you're trying too hard, which confirms what they already believed, that you don't belong. That's the thing about contempt. It isn't rational, so you can't argue your way out of it. Eleanor didn't dislike me because I'd done anything wrong. She disliked me because I was a reminder that her son had chosen a life she hadn't scripted for him. My presence meant her plan hadn't worked. Nothing I baked or said or brought to those dinners was going to change that. The most honest thing I can say is that I wasted years trying, and I don't fully regret it, because it showed me something about my own character that I needed to know. I learned I could keep showing up with good intentions even when the room was cold. That matters. But I also learned that goodness without discernment just gets worn down. Liam understood that long before I did. What Liam did, the years of quiet preparation, the meetings with Audrey, the binder full of documentation, that wasn't paranoia. That was a particular kind of intelligence that I've come to think of as the most underrated quality a person can have. The ability to see clearly without letting what you see make you cruel. He saw his family exactly as they were. He didn't pretend otherwise, didn't catastrophize, didn't cut them off dramatically. He just built something solid enough that their behavior couldn't reach us. He protected me not with anger, but with foresight. There's a kind of love in that which I'm still learning to fully understand. And then there's what came after. I won't pretend the bakery saved me in some cinematic way. Grief doesn't work like that. But having something real to return to every morning, something that required my hands and my attention and my judgment, that kept me from disappearing into the loss. The apprenticeship program, the renamed sign, the bannock pastries selling out every Saturday, none of that was strategic. It was just what happens when you stop spending energy defending yourself and start spending it building. The resources were there the whole time. I just needed the threat to be gone before I could see them clearly. What I keep coming back to is this. The people who tried to take everything from me did so because they assumed I had nothing to stand on. That assumption was the most expensive mistake they ever made. Not because I'm exceptional, but because they underestimated what 7 years of showing up honestly, working with integrity, and refusing to let their judgment become my own self-judgment will quietly accumulate into. Gordon's letter is still in the fireproof box. I take it out sometimes, not to gloat, but to remind myself that people can surprise you, even at the end. It doesn't undo the years. But it's honest, and I've decided that honest things deserve to be kept. The note by the proofing station still says, "The bread always rises." I'd started to think that's not just about bread.